We're here on the site of the Little Res 2 Timber Stand Improvement Project. This is a project on the Beaver District of the Fishlake National Forest. This is a project to do some thinning and piling and eventually to burn the piles adjacent to an inholding of private land, and then also around a Forest Service campground and a small reservoir that's a popular fishing hole in the area. The area that the Little Res Fuels project is, the southern and kind of eastern half of the project is in the ponderosa pine ecosystem. And after many years of fire suppression in this area and some other things, we've had just a really high number of trees per acre. So historically in the ponderosa pine, would have gotten a fire every 7 to 20 or so years. Would have had the needles burned off, would have ended up burning out some of the smaller trees, and had a larger proportion of large trees with pretty widely spaced, kind of a park-like stand. After so many years of suppressing fires and other types of growth-related things, some drought and some other stuff, we've ended up with a really thick stand here. So this stand, you can't just go in and burn a stand like that, because it'll have a lot of ladder fuels in it where the fire will climb from the small trees into the medium-sized trees and into the crowns of even these large ponderosas, which are really well adapted to surviving surface fire but can't survive when you have a crown fire move through. So the district staff was looking at the area as a potential area to do some work given the high values at risk, and decided that we would go in, thin out the stands, pile the material, and then burn that pile to reduce and eliminate that material. Then, in certain areas where it could be reasonably done, follow up with some prescribed burning on the ground. If you look at the ground in this area, there's a really thick layer of needle and duff and litter. And it's so thick, in fact, that you really can't get very good regeneration at this point, especially of the ponderosa pine that really wants that bare mineral soil to regenerate in. So if we're going to maintain this as a stand of ponderosa, then we're going to need to introduce fire back into the system, but we can't just do that from scratch. We have to do a thinning project like this to kind of reset the system to reasonably be able to reintroduce fire into it. In this ponderosa pine stand, one of the things that has come in, because in the stand where it's so thick and there's so much leaf litter, there's very little, if any, ponderosa pine regeneration, because it doesn't handle the shade very well and it doesn't handle the thickness of the needles on the ground. It can't really grow into that. However, this Rocky Mountain juniper loves those conditions. So much of what's getting cut here isn't even necessarily ponderosa pine. There is some being cut, as well as a few other things, but a large amount of what's going into these piles by volume is actually the juniper component. So we're trying to reduce that as much as anything. So doing a fuel treatment such as this, where we're reducing the amount of material by thinning it and piling it, is going to allow for several things. One, it's going to reduce fire behavior if and when we do have a wildfire move into this area. Also, because it's reducing the fire behavior, it gives the land managers and the fire managers and fire crews that end up in this area greater safety and greater options when they're trying to protect the structures that are adjacent to this project. So if this was just a wall of vegetation, there really wouldn't be very many options, but by removing the material, piling it, burning that, and reducing that risk and that fuel load to reduce that risk, it's creating greater numbers of options for when we actually come in here and do some prescribed burns, or even more so if there's a wildfire, being able to protect our own people, protect the public at large, and protect those values at risk, such as those cabins and that campground.